mode.
Thank you for joining us today. My name is Bill Baker. I'm with Firestorm, and this is the crisis leadership conversation that we're having, part of the Firestorm Forum. Our sponsor today and host are our good friends at the University of Alabama College of Continuing Studies. Roll Tide. And we'd like to have you become our friend on Facebook. On Facebook, we're known as Firestorm Solutions. You can follow us on Twitter, Firestorm Soul. There is a hashtag. That hashtag is Crisis Coach. Firestorm transforms crisis into value and empowers you to manage risks and crises. Firestorm expertise is crisis management, critical decision support, crisis communications, crisis public relations, and consequence management. We are advised that this presentation is not complete without the accompanying oral comments and discussion, and this information should be discussed in conjunction with advice from your organization's personal counsel. Please do not interpret this advice as legal advice or legal opinion. As I mentioned, this webinar series is underwritten by the University of Alabama College of Continuing Studies. This is the 10th in the 2016 series. We have past webinars, a couple or 3 years back with the University of Alabama. You can go to firestorm.com and you can watch past webinars, and you can register for future webinars that occur on a monthly basis. Our moderator today is Shanna Ullman. She's a program manager for the corporate engagement, and she's with us today. Shanna, over to you, please.
Good morning. I am with a division of the University of Alabama called Bama at Work. And Bama at Work is the corporate training and organizational development arm of the University of Alabama. And we have two courses that are coming up very soon in December 13th and 14th on campus that I wanted to talk briefly about. These are two brand new courses that we are rolling out on strategic and tactical human capital management. And we are looking to drive the future of HR, not where we are right now in HR, but where is HR going in the next couple of years. So as we start to look at where HR is headed, we looked at Deloitte's 2016 study on human capital trends. And so we based these two classes off of Deloitte's study on where HR is going and where the things that are going to present challenges for business leaders within the human capital area in the next few years. The courses are open for HR practitioners, of course, but anyone really with any kind of HR responsibility. So it doesn't necessarily have to be an HR manager, but if you have any type of HR responsibility within your role, this course is obviously for you. And then several of the topics that we're going to be covering in these courses. The first day will be the strategic human capital management course, and it's around kind of that critical thinking, the strategic planning within the human capital realm. What we're going to be looking at is kind of the organizational design. How are organizations trending more towards teams? How do we manage people across generations? How do we shape our culture to start to tie HR to drive strategy? And then engagement within our workforce. The second day is more on the tactical side of human capital management, looking at kind of that fact-based analytical approach to implementing the strategy that we talked about in the first day. So the second day we'll be talking about HR and business continuity. Is your organization ready to ensure that continuity in times of emergency or business disruption? The people analytics side, and then the digital HR, how do we start to communicate with our workforce digitally? And we'll wrap up that day talking about the gig economy. as we look at our United States workforce, about 55% of our employees now are what we call gig employees, which are not full-time. They have what we would term in the music industry gigs. So they work a gig over here and a gig over there to put together an entire 40-plus hour work week. But how do we start to manage a huge chunk of our workforce that's going to be part-time gig employees? Our leads for this workshop are Mr. Jim Satterfield, who is the president of Firestorm, on this call today. Mr. Dan Hilbert from Health Vision, Dr. Robert Prescott, and Dr. Bill Rothwell, who are both human resources experts in their field, and Mr. Larry Baldwin, who's the director of the Alabama Human Resources Institute. There is information on your screen right now about how to register for these courses. Again, they are live at the University of Alabama on December 13th and December the 14th at the Conference Center. You can register by calling the numbers on your screen. You can go visit our website at bamaatwork.ua.edu, and then my contact information is also on the screen. Feel free to contact me if you have any questions at all about this course. We have some early bird fees that are available until the 13th of November, and we have given a discount to attend both days.
Thanks, Shannon. This is Jim, just wanted to jump in and support. These are great opportunities to meet with peers, network, and then to get the expertise that's been identified. I was fortunate enough to be at an event with the University of Alabama last week in Birmingham and dealing with some of the topics, and there was a large turnout. I think about 250 HR directors were there across the state and a chance to come in. And I think this will give you a more in-depth view and a much more hands-on learning opportunity. Glad to be with everyone today. We've got a lot to talk about what's been going on, and I want to raise that question of when we use the word crisis, what comes to your mind? What are you thinking about when you hear those words? There are a lot of images up on the screen. We've seen a series of things happen over the last several months over the summer leading up to this point. And when we think about a crisis, it's a turning point, and the future events are going to come and have an impact directly. So when you think about this, and you think about what comes to mind in a disaster, think about your own organization and what's the worst disaster that you will ever see. On the screen, in looking at it, point out the location where the disaster is going to strike. Well, there's some white dots and some gray dots, and it's kind of hard to figure out where that disaster is going to hit. But suddenly when it does occur, it then becomes into more prominence, and we'll start to document those events. But the worst disaster you'll ever see is the one that strikes your business, your company, your people, your organization, and has that impact directly on it. If that's not occurring, you kind of blend in with everybody else. So our goal is to be prepared to deal with it, so when that disaster does come, that we can respond, mitigate those impacts, and not have the damage from that crisis affecting our brand. Because if left unchecked, uncontrolled, it's going to dominate everything in the space around us. It's going to have a significant impact disproportionately on our people and on our business and our brand and our reputation. In holding the conversation today about crisis, we think back about what's occurred over the last 3 or 4 months. And in doing that, I started to put that into a couple of different buckets to think about. And the first bucket that came to mind was violence. And we still see shootings, and the term active shooter is out there. And we've seen it in a variety of business environments and situations. We had the shootings that occurred up in the state of Washington at the Macy's department store, where an individual came into the cosmetics department. You would think that would be a safe area to be, and started to happen. It goes beyond just shootings. We had in Minnesota an attack in another mall with a knife where people were attacked. We certainly have seen shootings continue in schools, and some disturbing event around that. There was a shooting in September in South Carolina at a school. A 14-year-old boy had killed his father, took the family car, drove to a nearby elementary school, and as he pulled in, the 4th grade class was going out onto recess. He took down his rifle and started to shoot. He hit 2 students and a teacher. The teacher, although wounded, was able to get the students back into the building. The school went on lockout with the shooter outside the building. First responders were notified, and when they got on the scene, they were in fact able to subdue the shooter at this point. As you probably remember, Firestorm employs a great many retired FBI, Secret Service, other backgrounds and professionals in the space. And as they do that, we sometimes get calls from the media to comment. And one of our retired Secret Service agents was contacted from the media to speak on this particular event and said, sure, we'll be glad to do it. And they scheduled the call for the follow-up. And then they contacted and said, no, we're not going to do a story. It's not a big deal. It's not a major story. Think about how far we've come in America, that the fact that someone attacked a school, shot 3 people, 2 students, and it's not a big deal. That's a very telling comment and statement. Also, if you went to the parents of those 2 children, do you think they would think it was a big deal? I do. It is a big deal when any of these events happen. It even becomes a bigger deal in my mind when I know that the boy in the 4th grade who was shot in the leg ultimately died. They weren't able to hit an artery, they weren't able to save him, and he died. To have someone say it's not a big deal doesn't really justify where we are in the environment that we find ourselves. We had the shootings in the club down in Orlando. We've seen copycats as a result of that. Terrorism on our home soil remains an issue. We had the bombings in New York and New Jersey, and the idea of a lone wolf acting in those particular areas. We've had civil unrest. We've had questions about shootings by policemen in live fire events. We've had policemen targeted now in 3 different states with events going on where they were sought at and approached. We've even had an outbreak with clowns, where this has been a phenomenon that's been affecting our schools, where social media postings, the clown comes to school. We worked with a school district, and they'd had a report, what do you want the clowns to do? And the students started posting, I want you to kill this teacher or that teacher, or sexual acts being performed. So violence suddenly starts to dominate who we are and what we do in a variety of areas. That shark that you see in the water there at the center, it's a constant reminder when we think about crisis and violence, the linkage between the two. We were also reminded in the last month about natural disasters. We've had floods, we've got droughts. Alabama currently is in a drought, as many of you know. In other states in the southeast, we've had raging winds coming in off the west coast, particularly in the Oregon and Washington area. And we just had Hurricane Matthew that came through and hit Florida and Georgia and the Carolinas, with significant impacts with flooding in North Carolina. And I think the death total now in this particular storm is 40 people coming in. But when you think about it, look at this house sitting on the rocks. This is off of St. Simon's Island there, and you see the beach, and down in the bottom right-hand corner you'll see the waves there just starting to come. But in the hurricane, the waves came up to the rocks and in fact over, and it was forecast that there'd be a 20-foot tidal surge, or storm surge associated with this. Imagine then looking from the top of those rocks up another 20 feet where that water would have come. If this was your house, how would you feel about it? Again, the aspect of every crisis is a human crisis, and the impacts are there, but certainly another factor for us to consider. Beyond that, cyber breach remains a concern. You can't necessarily lock everything away and protect it. And we're seeing that a cyber breach is really a business problem, not an IT problem. And the common term of art here, when we think about it, is many of these breaches come as a result of human error, where they have clicked on an attachment or gone to a site, and as a result, malware was downloaded onto computers and created a damage within the organization. By the way, that term is called picnic, problem in chair, not in computer, picnic. So if you think about that, cyber breach is a big exposure. We had the release from Yahoo where billions of people were impacted by the breach that they occurred. But if you're a small company and it's your customers, your information, your financial information that's out there, if someone comes in and puts in ransomware to deny you access to it, now it's personal. And so it today impacts both large and small companies. We certainly have seen a lot of brand impact, and it certainly is a tangled web out there. Wells Fargo had 5,300 employees terminated for fraudulently opening several million accounts for customers that they were unaware of, incurring fees. They then got commissions and bonus checks and promotions as a result of that. The person in that area was terminated and resigned, and now just this week the CEO was forced to resign. The loss of credibility has been extreme and will be linked to that organization for an extended period. They also incurred hundreds of millions of dollars in fines and penalties as a result. Samsung has had a tough last 3 months with the Galaxy 7 phone bursting into flames. I don't know if you saw just a week ago, there was another plane where the person had it on the plane, and as they were boarding, it burst into flames and then melted through the floor of that plane. Imagine had it been in air. Now the phones are banned completely from all planes and withdrawn from the market with full refunds being granted. Think about the financial impacts there. Samsung also had a tough fall with their freight line that they'd selected to bring merchandise from South Korea to the U.S. for the Christmas season, TVs. They went into bankruptcy, the transportation company, and the ships were turned back. So they may be without product in the stores for Christmas. We can also look at the candidates and what's being said in the election and the impacts associated with it. Think about those words and what they mean in the conversations that are coming in. So when we think about a crisis, brand impact is certainly right at the top. Over the last few months, we had concerns about communicable illness, with thousands getting Zika. Florida was the hardest hit state and still is affecting tourism in the Miami area. Look for that to continue to expand next summer and as we get into the spring and coming back. So it will be coming up to probably around the middle level of the states across the country. The northern states may escape some of the insect-borne, mosquito-borne illnesses there, but it could be whooping cough or chicken pox or other things that could come and impact us as well as a pandemic. But communicable illness certainly is a crisis. And when we think today about the human toll, every crisis is a human crisis. Each of the things we've talked about up to this point have a human element within it. So what are the lessons that we've learned from these? First, a crisis is not business as usual. It's business as unusual. And there'll be some common themes that we'll talk about here, that all the information you learn initially won't be correct. In fact, most will be wrong, and you're going to be forced to make decisions between bad options. What do you do and to come back? And the second element to remember is that every crisis is a human crisis. It's that house that you saw on the coast. If that was your house, what did it mean? If it was the shooting at your company or your school, if it involved your child or a coworker, what's the impact that's going to come as a result of it? So when we think about the crisis, we think about what's the point. And if you look at the colored pencils, it becomes a matter of perspective. You've got some in a jar or a glass there and some stacked up. But for each one of those pencils, they've got their own perspective based upon where they are and what they bring. And so it comes back being a personal story. When we think about crisis, we need to think about it on a personal level, because in each one of these areas, that's where it comes. So what should you do? We've talked a lot about what's occurred and what we're seeing in the news, but what does it mean when it comes back to me, my company, my organization? Well, you'll find yourself in high visibility. That microscope there looks like it's a little dated, but certainly is able to get under scrutiny, and that's where you'll find yourself in a crisis. And the term of art here that helps maybe to better understand what you need to do is this word STOPT. Use it as an acronym to help your organization figure out what needs to occur. The S in STOP stands for stabilize the situation. You really want to slow everything down. You don't want to have a rush to judgment. We want to have people have a chance to think about what's going on, to understand the impacts, and then better to be able to plan. In fact, there's always going to be a rush for judgment here, a rush to get a comment out. And so the first thing you need to do in a crisis is just to stop and slow it down. The second is trigger the appropriate resources. What types of resources do we need? Do we need our outside counsel involved to think about legal issues? Do we need to notify our insurance carrier to get financial support or even access to resources? Depending upon the type of problem, you could get a breach coach to deal with a cyber breach, or a crisis coach to deal with the crisis area. Also, do you need counselors? If you've had fatalities or injuries on site, what resources do you need to come in? So first we stabilize, figure out what's going on, then we look at what resources we need and who should become involved. The third is then opine on the exposures. What are the consequences of this event? You want to make decisions not just for the short term, but for the long term. What does it mean to our organization, and what must we do to work through that process? And then finally, you want to prevent the common crisis errors and mistakes. We see the same mistakes repeated over and over. So we're going to give you today some do's and don'ts, and that'll be a good point for you to maybe grab a couple of notes when we get to that point, with specific things to look for to make sure that you absolutely do and you absolutely avoid. Now, that first, stabilize the situation, I want to give one comment right on at this point, and that's talking about crisis communications. You're going to hear someone come and say, oh, we got to frame this issue. We've got to get out in front of it. Maybe it's a board member. Maybe it's someone in your senior leadership team. And that picture of buttons, I wanted to remind you that you want to button up. You want to be quiet. Time is on your side initially at this point. So you want to slow everything down. You don't want to rush a comment out and find out that what you thought was occurring, in fact, didn't occur that way. What you thought you had in place, you didn't have in place, and now you will find that you've lost credibility. So slowing it down and buttoning up. So remember the button picture later when you're in a crisis and people are saying, oh, we've got to get our comments out. We've got to frame this issue. No, not initially. By the way, there are three types of communications in a crisis. The first is coordination. What do we need to do? And that communication does go out immediately. That's the shelter in place, the evacuate, the lockdown, the lockout. Those commands, that coordination is the first. The second that can be delayed is the crisis communications, dealing with the brand and reputational aspects. And the third that can be delayed is the compliance communications. If there had been a cyber breach, you'd want to notify those individuals whose information was done. But this crisis communications, this first stabilization, the first part of STOPT is let's stop those communications. The second is triggering resources. What are those resources you need? Is it a fire extinguisher to put out a fire? Is it reporting it? What marbles do you need in order here? What controls do you have to have in place? What are those resources that we can call in and have done? Then we shift to that opine to talk about what are the consequences. What I can tell you, your organization's next crisis is likely going to be how you responded to the crisis that you're currently in. Your response will determine how severe this crisis will be and what the next one would come to. So if we've talked about the first three letters in STOP, let's go back now about what it is that we want to try to prevent. What is it that we need to do, or what is it that we need to not do to avoid? So as we start doing this, I'll give you 12 things to focus on under make sure that you do. First, determine who's the general. Who's going to lead this crisis team? Is it the CEO? Is it a board member? That person must give clear direction, and we're not going to be making decisions in this crisis by voting and seeing which way. Every crisis needs a general. Second, determine the why of communications. When people start to tell you, well, we've got to get our message out, we have to communicate, I want you to stop and ask that question, why, 5 times. Someone says, we need to communicate. Go, why? And then they give you an answer. Then ask, why? And they'll give you an explanation. Then ask, why? If you can go through that 5 times, then, yep, you should communicate. If you don't have good answers there, slow this down, don't communicate, and you're focusing in on why we're communicating now and why the media. I will tell you later, we will not communicate through the media. You want to communicate directly. You know how to reach your employees. You know how to reach your customers. You know how to reach your suppliers. You want to communicate directly and never through the media, particularly in the initial stages of this crisis. You remember that almost everything you learn in that first 24-hour period is wrong or factually incorrect. That's one of the reasons why we're not doing these communications. If the media does call, someone should take their name, their affiliation, their contact information, and promise to pass that information on. You should not return those calls. By the way, I'll tell you in advance, the media is going to say, well, we're going to have to go to on air with this or go to press, and we have a 5 o'clock deadline, and if we don't hear from you, we're going to go without your side. And don't respond, but that'll be fine, because then the only thing they can say is we were unable to reach a spokesperson from the organization. Make sure that all your employees know that they're not supposed to talk to the media. This is not their 15 minutes of fame that's coming in. They would just say they're not an authorized spokesperson, but they pass that information on. Anticipate if there are injuries or fatalities or a criminal act, you've now lost control of your building, your campus, your facility. The first responders on that, and they will determine who has access here and there, how reunification would happen, all of the other areas. And that crime scene, in fact, could remain for days. So it's not a matter that it's going to be over and done with. So what you would want to do is to appoint someone to interface with the first responders, not the head of the crisis team. They would be reporting back to them. If you have to communicate in any situation, stick to your home bases. Home bases are base messages, and this would be important to remember, and there are 3 that you can use in any situation, which is significantly better than no comment. Number 1 is that you'll not be defined by the event. Number 2 is that you will invent the future. And number 3 is that you'll embrace the families. So if you think about this bad thing that's happened, it's not really what your company or your organization's about. So you can stop and say, that's not what we're about. What we're about is, and then look at your mission statement. Look at what's said on your website. Those are things that you can talk about. Number 2, what I can tell you is that we're going to put controls in place to make this the safest or the best or whatever it would be the equivalent of that going forward. So you're talking about the future, again, a safe area. But lastly, it's not about the being defined or what we're going to do. It's about the people that were involved. Our hearts go and prayers go out to them directly. And those are safe bases that you can talk about. And it's much better than talking about what the facts are. And we'll tell you later that if you're explaining, you're losing. You have to monitor social media. Today, if someone has ill intent, 80% of the time someone else knows, 67% of the time 2 or more people know, and when people know, what do? They talk, and they talk on social media. If you don't have an open source intelligence network for your organization and a way to monitor that, you're going to be missing critical information that will become very important to your leadership team. Now, the good news is that many of you monitor social media for your marketing and ad campaigns. We had so many click-throughs and so many responses. You can convert that marketing tool into a risk management tool and think about it. That's an important way for you to know what's going on. The next 3 all relate to dealing with the victims, the people that were impacted, hurt, or injured. And they're going to have a huge impact on how the company is viewed internally and externally. If there are injuries or deaths, you want to appoint company representatives to work with the family. I recommend a man and a woman on 3 different teams. So you'd have 6 people so that you've got 24 hours coverage and support to help them to meet with their needs that they would have. And before you make any communications, remember you have confidentiality issues, whether it's personal health or HIPAA or others. Before you release any communication about one of your people, You want to clear it with their family. You want to do it at their support. And if they say, I don't want you to say anything now, that's a reason that you're not communicating there. What you should avoid is don't say anything. Tell everyone that they're not authorized to speak. It's that stop. That's the biggest mistake. Don't ever talk through the media. If the media calls and they get you on the phone, then they can say, I called the company today and spoke to Joe Smith, and then they say whatever they want to say, and it sounds as if Joe had said those things. Don't talk through the media. You know how to reach your employees. You know how to reach your customers. You know how to reach your vendors. You know how to reach your shareholders. Go to them directly. Do not go to them through the media. Never give dates and numbers. Don't get caught into a numbers game. Well, we just repaired that, or we just fixed it, or we've tested it 500 times. You've got a crisis. Once you start to give specifics, you're going to find out that they really aren't what you thought they were. Don't put anything in writing. Communicate orally, face-to-face first, telephonically. If you have to put a message out in writing, write the message, put it up on your website, and direct people there to see it. Don't explain. You can't explain why this terrible thing happened. So if you're explaining, you're talking about the problem, you're losing. By the way, I've never found a sheriff or a police chief or a fire chief who didn't love the media. They love to talk about the problem and what they did and how they're doing it. Let them do that. Don't stand on the podium. They'll carry that. You want to talk about the solution, the future, what you're going to be doing. And also, don't forget someone important in this process, be it a shareholder or a donor, someone else or a regulator that you have to be involved. There'll be pressure in any situation. Once it's not a life safety issue, then time is your friend. In the life safety area, we need to get people out or sheltered or whatever we must do. Once that's beyond, then we have some time that we can understand it. Do not automatically turn over documents and computers to the police. Wait until you're directed by legal counsel. That's why assembling those resources and having counsel involved becomes so very important. The next three become related back to the family. You don't know what this means. It's not your spouse that died, it's theirs. It's not their son, their daughter, their mother, their father who was injured. It was theirs. So you can't take ownership of it. You can't categorize those feelings, and it doesn't matter how it made you feel. It's how they feel at this point and understand. All you really can say is that your thoughts and prayers are with them and as you work through it. Don't reply on social media. Someone posts a fact up on social media and it's a lie, it's wrong, it's bad, it's terrible. Don't comment on it. If you do, you're raising the SEO, the search engine optimization associated with it, and let those events move. Don't respond, and particularly initially. Let it sit, let it go. The more you start to bring it, you're giving credibility, and if you make a statement, then they respond. Now there's a chain, and you're directing that issue. And don't communicate through a third party. You want to always communicate directly with those that are involved. So we've covered a lot of ground. So what are some recommendations? You need a plan. You need a crisis management plan and a crisis communications plan of what you're going to do and what you're going to say, how you make those decisions, and it should align to standards and best practices. It gives you a framework to be able to start with in that process. Know the warning signs, whether it's a cyber breach or behaviors of concern that could give rise to violence. Many of these crises, we see them there in advance. That's where that open source intelligence becomes important. Look for anonymous reporting in your organization, those statistics about what's already known. By the way, if your anonymous reporting doesn't include text, then you're missing a key element of getting information in. Today's young people, if you go out to dinner and you'll see teenagers sitting there using their smartphones, texting, past the salt. If you don't have text anonymous reporting, you're missing a big source of information. You need to have a threat management or a threat assessment team that can evaluate those behaviors of concern and give you some direction. There has to be awareness and involvement. You need support resources that you can call in these particular areas. The open source intelligence network and monitoring of social media, how would you feel if you knew that information was out there and you didn't see it, when you could have seen it and you could have known and prevented it? Also, I'd look at your insurance. There are new insurance coverages out that were not there a few years ago, related to deadly weapons or active shooters or communicable illness or cyber breach. In testing your plans, I would take any test that you're doing, a test exercise, and have your insurance broker confirm that you actually have insurance coverage in place associated with those threats, and looking at what the resources that insurance carrier can bring to you. We had done an exercise with a client, and there were 8 things that happened in the crisis simulation exercise that was done. In the insurance analysis, only 6 of them were not covered. Only 2 of the 8 impacts on the company were covered by insurance. 6 weren't. Think about, wouldn't you rather know that in a test than wait to a live event to deal with it? And then finally, train and test your plans as you come together. So what are your next steps? Update your risk threat assessment for your organization. Annually, I know you do a check, and once every 3 years you need to go back to square one. But for every risk and threat that you've identified, have you identified what the impact would be, how you're going to monitor it, and what the trigger is to activate your plans? We find a disconnect within organizations who have identified their threats and risks but don't have established monitoring plans for them, and clearly don't have already defined communications plans with message maps for each one of those if they were likely to occur. If you were going to have a death of an employee, what would you say? What comments would you make at that point in time? After you've done that, then make sure that your crisis management plan aligns with best practices, that you have pre-action steps that need to take place before the event, that you have specific actions at onset, impact assessment, response and recovery, and then after any event, you're doing a hot wash or an after-action analysis of what went right, what went wrong, and how you need to update your plan. Develop a crisis communications plan with message maps. It's easier to edit than it is to create, so if that plan lays it out, you're going to find a significant improvement as a result of that. Contact Firestorm if you find yourself in a crisis. We'll get on the phone initially and provide you crisis management support in that first hour at no charge. We find that slowing this down, having a chance and having somebody as a sounding board to help you makes a difference, because it's your people, it's your company, it's your brand and reputation. Having that outside vision makes a difference. Do an analysis of your current insurance and your current response plans. Find out that there is 100% alignment, or if there are gaps, what those gaps are, so that you can bring them into play. And lastly, stress test your plan. You can do that with a customized exercise on site and do a tabletop exercise. Firestorm provides virtual exercises about every other month. Over the last year, we've done cyber breach, active shooter, sexting, cyberbullying for schools, Zika. We did a natural disaster in August, and we have another exercise planned coming up in December. We've been running anywhere from 500 to 1,000 companies in each virtual exercise, and it's a chance for you to have your crisis management team, and you can benchmark your response to other companies and see how you're doing. And again, there's no charge for that. It's a great opportunity to understand where you are. So looking at this, the Predict, Plan, Perform leads us through. There will be a brief based on today's webinar and discussion. You can go to Firestorm. You go click on resources and then go to recorded webinars and briefs, and you can download a brief with some of the slides from today's presentation. So I would encourage you to do that each and every time. And then, as Bill talked about, we've been doing this webinar series now with the University of Alabama for, I believe, 4 years. So you've got an inventory of webinars and information that you can go back and use as training tools within your organization. Our thanks go out to the College of Continuing Studies, to the University of Alabama, and Bama at Work. Shanna, do you have anything you want to add today and remind everyone about the December event coming up?
Just that the information on how to access our website and how to register for the classes is at the beginning of the slides on this webinar. My contact information is on there, so if you have any specific questions or want a little more detailed information, please feel free to reach out to me directly, and I'll be glad to give you all the information that we have, and we'd love to have you attend our training. And Jim will be going even more in depth in his section of that training as well, with some exercises and learning more about continuity in crisis as well.
Thanks, Shanna. And I think these are great opportunities, and we very much appreciate the ongoing relationship with the University of Alabama. We covered a lot of material today, and I think it's important that crisis is something that impacts our organizations. In many cases, business continuity professionals don't find themselves viewed as strategic within the organization. They may fall into a tactical area. Being prepared to think about this from a crisis standpoint, what are the impacts on our people? What's the impacts on our brand and our reputation? Helping to lead those decisions in an organized manner makes a difference. It moves you from being a tactical player within the organization to having a strategic vision and an insight. I will guarantee you, if you went and talked to the board associated with your company or organization, they would suddenly think the word crisis is pretty strategic. It's the type of things that will change the events. To underscore that, if you went back and you looked at the Fortune 100 10 years ago, and then 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, and 50 years ago, we found that there's been a significant change there. There's not going to be the ability of that company to have one that's going to last for an extended period. You don't pick up your phone today and call Blockbuster to get a video. The world is changing, and the changes of crisis, recognizing what's happening here, will make a significant difference within your organization. You play a strategic role within your company. We want to make sure that all of those elements are there. If you've got questions about today, you can contact us at firestorm.com or send an email to webinars@firestorm.com or call us at 800-321-2219. I'm going to ask some of our Firestorm principals to try to reach out to everyone on our call today to answer other questions, because we didn't have enough time to be able to address them all individually. I think there are opportunities around us each and every day. We find that our companies are under attack from violence, natural disasters, cyber breaches, communicable illness, brand and reputation events. What will happen in those outcomes? There will be a difference if you have a plan. Predict, plan, perform. Thank you for your time today. Have a great weekend, and hope your football team wins over the weekend. Talk to you all later. Thank you. Good day.